A mainstream Italian newspaper has reported that President Donald Trump has been briefed about an extraterrestrial communications program called Project Preserve Destiny. The assistance of the ant people in helping humans to survive catastrophic global events is well documented in the legends of the Hopi and other indigenous peoples. Scientists speculate about 3I/Atlas as an interstellar visitor using astronomical data, hypothesizing its extraterrestrial connection. Will the United States Air Force Undersecretary move the UFO disclosure process forward given his ball of light experience, or will he be given a classified UFO briefing and be told not to say anything publicly about them? A former CIA contractor says the CIA tracked alien DNA in children, thereby corroborating UFO abduction experiences. These stories and more on Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Welcome to Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review. It is July 26th. We're getting this story out a little bit later than normal. I had an event yesterday, so I couldn't do the recording, but plenty to talk about. So let me dive straight into the stories that I want to cover for this week. First of all, there is this mainstream Italian newspaper called L'Espresso that has reported that President Donald Trump has been briefed about an extraterrestrial communications program called Project Preserve Destiny. The project was first revealed by Dan Sherman, a 12-year U.S. Air Force electronics communications specialist who was assigned to the NSA, where he worked both in a classified electronic communications program that was a cover for the more highly classified Project Preserve Destiny. Sherman was trained as an intuitive communicator with gray extraterrestrials that were conducting people all over the United States. So this newspaper that is a mainstream newspaper is essentially telling the Italian public that there has been a briefing of President Trump where he's told about this Project Preserve Destiny. Now, this comes on top of earlier revelations that President Trump was briefed about the existence of Nordic-looking extraterrestrials. That was a briefing that David Grush revealed to Congressman Eric Burlinson just less than a month ago. And back in December 2020, Israel's Professor Haim Eshed says that Trump was working with the Galactic Federation trying to come up with the disclosure plan with them, but the Galactic Federation said no at that time. So here we have what could potentially be a third source, a third briefing that Trump was told about Project Preserve Destiny, according to these sources that L'Espresso relied on. Now, L'Espresso doesn't name the sources, but the fact that it's a mainstream Italian newspaper and that it has a reputation for putting out news rather than propaganda, although these days you can ask, you can raise a question mark for any mainstream newspaper that puts out any story. But still, I thought that this story was very interesting, that it is preparing the Italian public that the president knows about extraterrestrial life, and so they can expect some kind of briefing in the future. And remember, Italy is where the Vatican is located, and the Vatican now has an American Pope. So I would not be surprised if the Vatican, the Italian government, and the US government work closely as we get closer and closer to some kind of official disclosure announcement or extraterrestrials revealing themselves. Now, Christopher Sharp, who is the founder of the Liberation Times, an online newspaper, has written a succinct report on the various issues raised in the Italian news article, and the contrast with Trump's lack of action to promote UFO extraterrestrial disclosure. So that's something I've talked about in the past, why it is that Trump has done so little to promote UFO extraterrestrial disclosure, despite the fact that he's had now what might be 3 briefings or several briefings at least about different extraterrestrials visiting us. And I talked about that in my previous week in review, where I discussed the power and influence of the evangelical Christian community on the Make America Great Again movement. And because they believe extraterrestrials are demons, that would be a constraint on Trump kind of like moving forward on his own. So I think maybe this is why the Italians and eventually the Vatican are going to get involved, because the Vatican can disclose the existence of extraterrestrial life without any big pushback, because the Vatican has already prepared its public that extraterrestrials are potentially brothers in Christ. They can be baptized. They actually have a higher ethical foundation than humans, whereas evangelical Christians are told, are kind of pumped with all this information about grey abduction. So they think the opposite. They think extraterrestrials are grey. So a grey is doing all these abductions, and so therefore they're demonic and part of the kind of like fallen angel agenda. So I think there's potentially much more that we can expect happening from Italy. Okay, here's an interview I did with Laura Eisenhower. I discussed it in my last week in review, and so now the article or the video interview is available on YouTube and Rumble, and you can watch it there or on Patreon ad-free if you're a subscriber. Now, with the information that Laura put out, we discuss the role of the returned anunnaki, and is this a good thing or not? And it all goes back to this kind of like pre-contact time, or the time before the Anunnaki arrived on Earth. What was the state of humanity on Earth at that time? Now, the common or the scientific perspective is that, well, the Earth had these primitive hominids kind of like going about, and they probably just mastered fire or so forth, and so nothing really special about those very early primitive humans. And then the Anunnaki arrive, and they say, oh, look at that, look at all these primitive hominids here, we can use those as kind of like a DNA foundation for an intelligent worker race. And so that's the story according to the Sumerian texts. Now, what Laura brings up is another perspective, that before the Anunnaki arrived, that there were these 12-strand DNA humans that interacted and worshipped the mother goddess Tiamat, and that's supported by scholars such as Joseph Campbell, who was a world-famous mythologist, who talked about the mother religions that predominated all over the earth before the arrival of the sky gods, who then established a kind of patriarchal religion, or patriarchal philosophies and religions that continued to the modern era. But before the arrival of the Anunnaki, the story goes that, well, you had these 12-strand DNA humans that were incredibly connected to the planet. And then the Anunnaki arrive. They see these maybe there was a mix, or maybe they just arrive and they see the product of earlier extraterrestrial interventions, and they wanted to kind of like wipe the slate clean, and so they essentially slaughtered the 12-strand the 12-stranded humans, the kind of more evolved, highly evolved humans, and used their DNA for building this slave race, these 2-stranded humans, which is us. Now, Laura and I discussed that at length, and there is evidence for this in the Enuma Elish, where they talk about the war between the Anunnaki, led by Marduk, who was the son of Enki or Ea, against the forces of Tiamat and her general Kingu, who fought against the Anunnaki and lost. And out of their body, you have the creation of modern humans. So this is history written by the victors. And of course, in the Enuma Elish, it depicts Tiamat and Kingu as these horrific, kind of like titanic beings who used monsters in fighting against the sky gods, the Anunnaki, and in their golden shields, doing the righteous thing. But in fact, that is history according to the victors. The truth is, and if we take Laura's information to its logical conclusion, and there are sources that she cites and they're worth pursuing, then Kingu and Tiamat, what they represented were not these monsters. They represented these ascended or 12-stranded humans who were fighting for the sovereignty and the independence of the planet, and they were defeated, and the Anunnaki took over. So it's a very different story to what you get in the Sumerian literature, and definitely well worth exploring. And there'll be more on that in the future. Okay, so here is a story from Jason Wild, and he often just puts out information that helps us better understand who we are and how we stand in relationship to history and its depictions of extraterrestrials, gods, and so forth. So here he talks about the Hopi Indian legends concerning the ant people and how the ant people helped the humanity in earlier epochs escape cataclysmic events and took them underground, where they gave them shelter and helped the survivors learn whatever they needed to learn so that when they would return to the surface, they could help rebuild civilization. So here, Jason talks about the ant people, that these are actual beings, tall with dark eyes, who brought light that didn't, who gave the surviving humans, the refugees, they gave them light that didn't burn and food that grew without sun. And here it talks about the Hopi even build their sacred kivas to mirror the entrance into the ant people's world, entering through the Sipapu, a symbolic portal. Just stories, right? So he obviously is pointing to the fact that these are much more than stories. These legends talk about actual events that happened millennia ago, according to what the Hopi have taught in their myths. Now, according to JP, former US Army, he's been into the ant kingdom several times, and he talked about the light that didn't burn, that there's some bioluminescent plants used by the ant people that just light up the inner earth, and this is something that is a technology that we're not aware of yet on Earth, but definitely this is something that does exist according to what JP witnessed, and that they grew food without the sun. That in these underground caverns they have huge kind of like fields that where they grow their crop. And so Jason goes on to talk about the Dogon of Mali and other sources of ancient life forms on Earth, such as the amphibians. There's Oannes, the amphibious being, and so forth. So what you have are these legends of ant people and kind of like really a non-human civilization living underground, and that they would come to the surface to help humanity in times of transition or crisis. So this is something that we really need to take seriously, because I think it's not just legend. We've got the eyewitness testimony of people such as JP, who say that they were part of these covert military missions where they actually sought out and found the ant people, and that there has been communications between the ant people and at the very least the US Army. All right, so now I want to play this particular video, some UFO humor. I like to introduce a little bit of humor each week. So at the start of the week on Monday morning, I'll put out a tweet to some comedy that I think kind of like gets us laughing about the UFO issue. Laughing's, I think, very important given how serious the topic is, and sometimes we forget that it really does help clear the energy meridians, a good laugh. So here we have a comedian talking about rednecks. So let me play that for you. Okay, here we go.
I don't know why only rednecks are seeing UFOs. And here's the deal. You got to discount 90% of that stuff right off the top. Because my Uncle Jerry swore they had crop circles in their yard. Then we found out that his wife had called Goodwill and they'd come and got the trampoline and the boat trailer. So, you know, mystery solved. But let's just say for a minute that aliens really are visiting Earth, but they didn't want people to know they're visiting Earth. It makes sense that they would only reveal themselves to rednecks. Because A, we usually live out in the country, so there's not going to be a lot of witnesses. B, we have no credibility with the media. I mean, people might believe a doctor from UCLA if he saw one and said, well, they appeared to be bipods from a hydrogen and nitrogen-based environment whose primary respiratory organ was located within their moist, translucent epidermis. As opposed to Cletus in his overalls going, it looked like a giant booger with real skinny legs. And here's the deal with the abductions. See, rednecks don't get to take a lot of vacations. So if somebody comes around and offers to fly us somewhere for free, we're going. And if you're traveling the universe, who better to have on board than a redneck in case your spaceship broke down? Because we'd have the hood open going, all right, I see what the problem is. Your nuclear fusion doojiggy sprung a leak. But look here, y'all get me a coat hanger, a Mountain Dew can, and some duct tape. I'll get us as far as Uranus. I don't know why, after all these years, my wife continues to ask, what do you want for your birthday? What I always want for my birthday. What's every man on the planet want for his birthday? The same thing every woman on the planet doesn't want for her birthday. You know, never once has my wife said to me, forget the flowers, forget the presents, why don't you just lock the door and take me to Squeal Town? But it's what every guy wants. You can be visiting your 90-year-old grandpa in the nursing home and be like, happy birthday, Papa. Is today my birthday? Sure is. Well, help me get my pants off.
Okay, well, I think that's the UFO humor. There is, I thought, quite something. So let me now go on to what I consider to be a very optimistic assessment of the exopolitical situation we find ourselves in as a planet. Now, this is from this is actually a link to a YouTube video called "The Secrecy Dam is About to Break." It's on the GFL station, the Galactic Federation of Light station. And the channeler his name is Dave, or Dave Akira is the name of the channeler. I have spoken to Dave We had a long conversation a few months ago, and I think he to be a very credible person. Has a kind of unique background, and I have asked him to do an interview, and at the moment he's declined. He said he's happy for me to just talk about the website and the channelings he does. So what he does is he puts out information about the Earth from a perspective that I think is kind of like similar to the Confederation of Planets. That is a emphasis is placed on self-empowerment, spiritual awakening, as opposed to technological agreements and interplanetary alliances, which are favored by organizations such as the Galactic Federation of Planets. So in this particular video, he gives us a very optimistic assessment of the exopolitical situation arising from the release of documents by the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, showing the culprits behind the Russia collusion hoax, and that being the catalyst for the mass arrests of deep state figures that have been predicted since the first Trump administration. So those of you that were there during the first Trump administration, you probably remember people like David Wilcock putting out these announcements that the mass arrests are about to begin. Get ready, folks. Buy your 3 weeks of food and make sure you got plenty of water. 10 days of darkness, internet darkness, and public broadcasts from the White Hats telling us about the truth. And of course, we all waited for that, and kept waiting. And then all of a sudden, you had another election, and lo and behold, you have Joe Biden being elected, and then all of a sudden people are not expecting mass arrests anymore. And what we now have with the election of Donald Trump for a third time is that the mass arrests are back in the discussion. And for the first time, I think that with the release of these documents by Tulsi Gabbard, I believe that you actually have the culprits being identified. Now, this is information coming from this extraterrestrial organization, and Dave, in this particular case, says that he's channeling the Ashtar command. Now, this is where you get to the question of, well, is this a factual description of events happening on the ground, or is this really trying to shape a narrative or giving us hopium so that we can shape an optimistic narrative? And I think we need to start thinking more and more along the lines that extraterrestrials often will give us information that might not be factually accurate, but is more intended to shape our perceptions, to get us to collectively manifest an outcome that improves the human situation. And I think that's very important, that we start thinking in those ways, that doesn't make the extraterrestrials liars or deceivers if they're putting out hopium, but they're trying to shape our perceptions so that we can collectively manifest something that is much better than the situation we're in. And I think this is exactly what the Galactic or the GFL station is doing with a lot of its channelings, that they are putting out this kind of information. Some might say, oh, it's all hopium, but I think hopium really is just another way of describing a kind of shaping operation, if you like. I mean, the military does this all the time. You shape the battlefield. Well, if the battlefield is an information war, you want to shape it by putting out these positive narratives about, well, the bad guys, they're on their last legs, they're about to collapse, they're about to fall, and the more of us think that way, the more quickly that will happen. So let's hope that these mass arrests happen soon, as predicted. Okay, so here we have there's a paper that was written by Professor Avi Loeb, and he is commenting about this new visitor to our solar system, 3I Atlas, and that it might be more than just a natural comet or an asteroid. So the paper was written by Avi Loeb, Adam Hobart, Adam Crowell, and they are trying to speculate about what 3I Atlas could be based on the dark forest hypothesis. So the dark forest hypothesis is that the universe is full of intelligent life, but a lot of it is hostile. So it's almost like going into a dark forest and not knowing if there are wolves there, kind of like lying behind a tree ready to pounce on you. And so you send in a probe to find out what's going on. So this is what they're suggesting, that this object could in fact be an alien probe, and that it could be something that was sent here just to kind of like get information about what our solar system is like, and to transmit that information back to the alien home world so that they would know whether or not our solar system is hostile or not. Well, this is where I think the scientific perspective shows its limitations, because they can only go on the astronomical data that they were able to gather from different telescopes that are tracking the movement of 3I Atlas, and make any possible deductions they can from the data. But if we look at the information from whistleblowers and insiders, we can get much more insight into the true functions and origins of 3I Atlas. Now, according to JP, retired US Army, he attended a briefing where it was announced that 3I Atlas is activating ancient technologies in our solar system, including space arcs. So rather than a probe sent here to gather information, it may in fact be more of a transmitter sent by a civilization that views this period of time as the time when these ancient technologies need to be activated. And so that's very, very interesting, because according to JP, ancient space arcs are being activated around the planet, and that one of these in the Atlantic Ocean is now floating in the atmosphere and actually can be seen from space, or even seen from those in the water, but it does use stealth technology. So I think we obviously always appreciate the scientific effort to gather credible data that can kind of like withstand peer scrutiny, but at the same time we need to be open to other sources of data that can give us more of an idea of what's really happening, because ultimately scientists can't use astronomical data to understand what the motivations and the intent are behind a spacecraft such as 3I Atlas. All right, so here is a commentary I did on the Russia collusion hoax, where Russia collusion hoax exposed, saving America from a hostile ET takeover. So it was released first on Patreon. So thank you to all my Patreon subscribers. Really appreciate you being a subscriber. And for those who haven't subscribed, it's only $7 a month. And for that $7, you get 12 or 13 videos a month. It's about 60 cents per video, and it's all commercial free, and you get it in advance before it goes onto YouTube. And the added benefit is that these are uncensored. Sometimes I have to censor the YouTube videos so that I don't get another strike. So in this story, in this commentary, I talk about this hostile ET takeover as emanating from the Second World War, and that President Eisenhower set up a group of Marine generals to oversee how extraterrestrial related projects progressed. And if at any time those extraterrestrial projects or those running those projects threaten the continued survival of the American Republic, that these generals were authorized to go into action to take down the deep state. So that connects to these rumors or these claims from a number of sources. There have been several sources that have said that President Trump, before he was President Trump, he was approached by a group of generals or flag officers, retired flag officers, and the situation was explained to him. And they said, look, you need to run, because if you don't run, we're going to have to stage a coup. And if we do that, there's a very real risk of a civil war in the country. And so in order to prevent civil war, we want you to run for office, and we'll help you every step of the way. And the goal will be to dismantle the deep state and to expose all the advanced technologies that have been suppressed for decades and the existence of extraterrestrials and so forth. So Trump agreed to that. And so this is where we get into the whole Russia collusion hoax, because Trump was very early on working with Putin. Putin is part of this Earth Alliance, where you have this group of patriots from the United States wanting to preserve the American Republic, working with their equivalents, working with Russian authorities, and similarly with those within China that are also supporting the truth coming out with all the advanced technologies. So this leads to Tulsi Gabbard's release of the files showing that Russia collusion was hoaxed, and that was because the deep state wanted to take down Russia in a way that would facilitate an end times Gog and Magog war. So I explain all that in the article. It gives you an exopolitical perspective on geopolitical events and these major events happening in the United States now, with the exposure of the Russian collusion hoax, and of course the war in Ukraine, the war in what could have been a war in Iran. And so I go into details of all of that and explain how this is all aimed at saving America from this hostile ET takeover, which would have been a prelude to total global domination. Okay, so yesterday, Friday the 24th, I did an interview with Alex Collier, where we discussed quite a few exopolitical developments. And so this was, so you can just go to alexcollier.org and you can watch that interview I did with Alex yesterday. And we discussed a number of topics. We didn't always agree on everything. I think sometimes these disagreements are very valuable because they give you different perspectives on things. And the disagreement was over whether or not the Galactic Federation of Worlds has been infiltrated to some extent or not. Now, I cited my sources that say that infiltration has happened and gave my reasons for why that happened. Alex described what he was told by the Andromedans and what the Andromedans are telling him about the Galactic Federation of Worlds. So he started off very skeptical that infiltration was at all possible. Then I think he kind of thought that, well, even if some is happening, it is very little. And so that's where you have different perspectives on this information. I think this is a topic that really needs much more in-depth discussion. I plan to do that in my next Exopolitics commentary, where I'm going to be looking at all of the information that is available now on the Galactic Federation of Worlds and describe whether or not these claims that it's been infiltrated, and these the claims that it's been infiltrated go back quite some time, but more recently you have a Dr. Andrea Martin saying that the Galactic Federation was infiltrated, but she says that it has since been the infiltrators were removed, and that the Federation leadership is again being led by people who are not compromised in any way. So yeah, there's lots to discuss there. So I plan to do more analysis in my next commentary next week. But definitely worth taking a look at that interview with Alex. We cover a lot of ground, and he definitely has his own perspectives on things, which I think matches well with the exopolitical analysis I've been doing since 2001 now. Okay, so here we discuss this video that was presented by Gosha, a Polish-Spanish UFO researcher, describing the circumstances that led to her conclusion that a group of Tagetan extraterrestrials associated with Queen Mari's Swa had been infiltrated. So listening to Gosha's explanation of what occurred with Mari and others associated with the Swaru family sounds like a soap opera. Would human-looking extraterrestrials really act so abysmally in their relations with key human supporters? So there's been a falling out between Goshia and her Spanish compatriot Robert with these alleged extraterrestrials of Tagetan origin, who happen to be female, who apparently are here visiting Earth or somewhere in Earth orbit, apparently parked in an Andromedan mothership or some Galactic Federation vessel, or some more neutral extraterrestrial vessel, and kind of like interacting with Earth through electronic communications that come through the internet. Now, what makes this whole kind of like alleged infiltration very interesting is that the electronic communications with Tagetan ETs appeared quite genuine to begin with back in 2017 and 18, with original info being released that was later appropriated by some claiming to also be working with the Galactic Federation of Worlds. So this is where we need to look at the Swaru information as being very original. It came out in 2017 and 18. And so this was before the emergence of Elena Danaan and her information on the Galactic Federation of Worlds. And I've started to study the Swaru information, and I have found some points of correlation where their information was appropriated without acknowledgement, and that's something that I can discuss at length later. But the Swaru material was first, and it's a lot of original information in there, ideas that I have not come across. I mean, they talk about the fact that the Earth is not so much a prison planet, but it's a place that's contained because humanity has not yet learned how to collectively manifest an ideal society, that we are more in the mode of collectively manifesting our nightmares. So anyone that looks at Hollywood and what Hollywood is producing, you look at that and you say, oh, wow, incredible. This civilization, they are all about manifesting nightmares. And that's what's coming out of Hollywood. If you look at Bollywood in India, they're actually putting out a lot of good stuff. And so that, I think, is helping manifest a very different kind of reality. But apparently this is what the Swaru communications are all about, is to help humanity identify that we are collectively manifesting the wrong things, and what we need to do in order to manifest the right things, and that the Galactic Federation has been really containing the Earth for some time because we are a threat to the rest of galactic society, because we have not yet learned how to collectively manifest our dreams. Instead, we manifest our nightmares, threat scenarios. You look at the militaries; they produce white papers on, what is the most realistic threat in the next 10 years, and let's get funding and prepare for that. Well, if you're preparing for a war with China within the next 10 years and you get the resources to make that war happen, what's China going to do? It's going to be, oh, well, look, our white paper tells us that the realistic perception is that in 10 years' time we're going to have a war with the United States. So let's beef up our military. And so, you can see we as a society manifest our worst case scenarios. And what the Taigetan extraterrestrials are trying to do is trying to get us to understand that, and that the Galactic Federation is playing a role in monitoring all of this. But it's not necessarily a good or a bad organization. That the Galactic Federation is really just trying to contain things so that we don't become a menace for life out there. Okay, so in this video with Gosha, she describes how there's been this infiltration process that affects different extraterrestrial organizations, and that they described it first with the Galactic Federation, and then it has filtered through to the Taigetans themselves. So this is very important here, is that this information that the Galactic Federation was infiltrated goes back to the Swaru communications from 2017, 2018, and their narrative that the Federation is neither good nor bad, that it is really kind of like trying to control the different actors on Earth so that we don't get out of hand and threaten the galaxy. Okay, so this is something, this idea of different extraterrestrial organizations being infiltrated by negative actors leads to important questions. Can extraterrestrial organizations communicating with humanity be so easily infiltrated, and who's doing the infiltrating? So Dan Winter, I did an interview with him, and that's on Patreon at the moment. You can watch that, or the YouTube Rumble version will come out on Monday. So he describes these infiltrators as shape-shifting Autorthians, who he says are a species of greys. And this is also in the Swaru material, and that these are controlled by AI, artificial intelligence. So this is where we get into the information from the Wingmakers material, talking about a possible future takeover by hostile intergalactic AI called the Animus. Does the Galactic Federation of Worlds have a problem with AI beings infiltrating their organization? We did have in the Star Trek series, Deep Space Nine, you had these entities called the Changelings. And there were several episodes where they talked about the Federation of Planets actually being infiltrated by these changelings. So this is, could that be soft disclosure? I think that's exactly what was being described here by the Swaru material, Dan Winter, Gosha, and others. So what does all this suggest as humanity increasingly accepts AI in virtually every sector of modern life? To me, this suggests that ETs and organizations such as the Taygetans, the Galactic Federation of Worlds, the Ashtar Command, the many other galactic organizations that we hear of are not so different to humanity and can be easily infiltrated by negative actors. When I was working with Corey Good, he made the point, and I think it's still a very relevant point today, is that all galactic societies have problems with AI. And only those that are at the very highest levels that don't use technology but are pure consciousness based don't have problems with AI. So if an extraterrestrial civilization uses technology to be able to travel around, to communicate, to store information and so forth, then there is going to be a problem in terms of AI infiltration. So ultimately, the thing that we want to do is to be discerning. That's what I'm doing in terms of giving you all of the different perspectives on this information, because we need to reach conclusions for ourselves, and we need to connect with our own higher self, the heart center, but that infinity point within that helps us make the right choices. Because ultimately it's going to come down to what is it that you as an individual can do to manifest a reality around you that's going to improve the collective situation. Because I think we do have a responsibility here to work together to build a positive future, but we want to do it in a way where we're informed of the truth. We don't want to accept hopium thrown upon us by the Galactic Federation or those that are representatives of the Galactic Federation, who I think are probably doing what appears to be a very good thing in terms of giving us a positive vision to embrace and to support. But we really need to have all perspectives, and we can't exclude other people's perspectives because it goes against our narrative or the narrative that we want. Now, does that mean that we want to give equal time to fear porn? That on the one hand, you got, say, the Galactic Federation, or you got the Confederation of Planets putting out hopium, and it's like, okay, yeah, this is the future you have, and celebrate and all of that. Yeah, okay, we can celebrate the future that's coming. Or do we look at things that are happening around us right now? What's happening around us is that there is an AI takeover. People are still being abducted by grey aliens. People are still being subjected to military abductions. Now, do we talk about that, or are we putting out fear porn if you talk about that? No. I think you've got to talk about all of it and understand it all, and just not get caught up in the emotions, the fear, the anger, when you are talking about those negative scenarios. But I think that this AI threat, I don't think it's theoretical anymore. It is happening now with ChatGPT, with Grok. More and more people are giving their power away to ChatGPT and Grok. So, I mean, you can say that, well, you know, there are these draconians out there that are being driven out of our solar system, and they're a real threat, and we need to focus on them. It's like, well, look at the world around us now. What is the real threat confronting us? And I think a big threat is that humanity is giving its power away to AI. And it's not just individuals having their questions answered by Grok and ChatGPT, but it's also these military institutions that are using AI more and more to get a military advantage over their competitors. So it is a big, big threat, and it's not fear porn to discuss it. All right. Okay, so, all right, I've already talked about Gosha. Okay, here's the interview I did recently with Dan Winter, where we discuss this very point of AI and the threat posed by AI. And his information, and he's using a lot of the Swaru material, his information is that the Galactic Federation of Worlds has been infiltrated by AI. Now, some people will dispute that, and some people might get pissed off at me. Sorry if you are pissed off at me. But I think we need to discuss this. I think we just can't say this is fear porn, that this is just getting people into a fearful place on something because the Galactic Federation of Worlds is a basically clean. Some will dispute that. As I said, the Swaru material have been putting out information since 2017-18 that says the Galactic Federation is neither good nor bad. They're kind of like controllers. They're here to contain the situation we're in. George Kavasilis has also worked a lot with the Galactic Federation. He also points out that there are big limitations with its leadership. So could the leadership of the Federation be compromised by AI? I mean, I mentioned earlier the information from Dr. Andrea Martin that there was a significant infiltration that was detected and removed, but the threat is there. So I think as long as any organization uses some kind of technology, here we're talking about 4D, or fourth density, fifth density organizations such as the Galactic Federation. When we're getting to higher density organizations like the Confederation of Planets, 6th, 7th, and 8th density, they operate in non-duality, or this is where they operate where the good and bad polarities have merged, and they operate more and more on consciousness alone. So I think that's probably where you're not going to get infiltrated by AI, but at the 3D, 4D, and possibly even the 5D level, to varying extents, the AI is a problem, and it is certainly a big problem right now on planet Earth and in our lives. The more you rely on ChatGPT, Grok to answer questions, to summarize ideas, pages, to kind of like give you assessments of people and organizations, the more and more you do that, you are strengthening AI. I avoid it altogether. I just don't go there. I won't use it at all. And that's because it is monitoring us. The AI is monitoring us and getting all of the information we're putting out there, and it's very good at feeding back to us what we want to hear. Okay, so that Dan Winter interview comes out next Monday, but it's up there now for Patreon subscribers. Okay, so here is an overview of the Galactic Federation of Worlds that is very helpful in understanding its different levels and civilizations that are part of it from the perspective of the Swaru material. So I've already talked quite a bit about Gosha and the Swaru material. So let me just say at this point that if you're trying to get a sense of who's who, what the Galactic Federation of Worlds is all about, and what the Swaru opinion is about the Federation, because the Swaru is just a group of Tagetan females that have traveled to Earth to help humanity evolve and are watching the Galactic Federation and watching how they're managing the planet Earth. And they have criticisms of the Galactic Federation. So, I talk about why I think that Gosha's overview of the Galactic Federation is very helpful in understanding what is really happening here and the various agendas behind it. And for those that say that this information from Swaru is kind of like disinfo put out by the military intelligence community to kind of distort the views, public views about the Galactic Federation, it's important to point out that the Swaru material was first, that the more recent material that's come forward from people like Elena Danaan, Andrea Martin, and so forth, that came out years after the Gosha and the Swaru material first emerged. So this is not disinformation. I think the Swaru material is genuine extraterrestrial communications relayed through electronic means to credible UFO researchers in Spain that were sincerely putting out their best assessment and faithfully relaying everything that they were being told by the Taygetians. So to get a kind of Taygetan perspective of the Galactic Federation of Worlds, then this overview is well worth listening to. And with all my tweets, you can, or X posts now, I think you call them, you can just go to the link and you can get the actual link from my website. But in this one, this particular video is on the Cosmic Agency website, and it is called The Galactic Federation to All Earth Citizens. It came out 8 months ago, so you might have to do a search. Otherwise, you can just go to my Twitter feed, and the link will be right there for you. Okay, so here is a newly appointed US Air Force Undersecretary who revealed his sighting of a UFO or a ball of light. So let's listen to what he has to say.
But I was watching a documentary that was done in 2020 called Phenomenon. I was watching it with my wife late at night, and it was probably 45 or 60 minutes into this documentary. We had air traffic controllers talking about a phenomenon that they occasionally see at their airfields. It's not common, it's rather rare, of these balls of light that seem to zip around the flight lines and be able to defy the known laws of physics incredibly fast. And they were like big orbs of light, orange or yellowish in color. And I paused the film, and I remembered, as odd as that sounds, that I'd seen the exact same thing in high school when I was in the mountains in Arizona. And I told my wife, I said, I've seen this. I know exactly what they're talking about. And she said, no, you haven't. I said, no, I really have. And she says, we've been married for 10 years. You've never mentioned this once. And it's true. I hadn't mentioned it because it was one of those things I'd never understood. It was a very peculiar experience. I was with another girl at the time when I saw this, and so I said, look, come with me. We're going to go to Facebook. We're going to go online, and we're going to send a message to this girl I've not reached out to in 20 years, and I'm going to say, hey, remember me? Remember that time we were in the Tucson Mountains? Which is exactly what I did. I said, do you remember that thing we saw? And I didn't say anything else. And she responded back immediately, and I was like, hey, be careful, my wife's here with me. I don't want you to embarrass me. And she said, yeah, that big freaking ball of light UFO thing that we saw. And my wife was surprised that, in fact, it was just as that documentary Phenomenon had depicted it. And what I shared with my wife thereafter and had always been puzzled about was that this ball of light that we saw descending down over our head got close enough for me to look at it and into it, and it seemed to be buzzing with life, but it wasn't man-made. It was very well organized, very spherical, and it seemed to be very conscious of the two of us that were sitting there in the Arizona mountains, like it was observing us. And it was a distinct impression that I had that I was being watched, observed, that there was a level of interest from the orb to us, and it frightened us. And so we got up and we ran to the car and we ran away, and that thing zipped up and disappeared in the sky.
Okay, so what makes this particular experience interesting is that the witness, Matthew Lowmeyer, was recently made the Undersecretary to the US Air Force. So he's now in a position of authority. And of course, this is something that you would think would kind of like motivate him to kind of like learn more about the UFO phenomenon. So the question is whether he's going to be allowed to help the UFO disclosure process move forward, or whether he's going to be given a classified UFO briefing and told not to say anything publicly about them, which seems to be the way in which often officials are kind of shut down, that they're given a classified briefing where more is revealed to them, but then they can't talk about it. Otherwise, they get into trouble. So certainly it is encouraging that people who have had UFO experiences are being promoted to more senior positions in the bureaucracy, but ultimately, how much authority will they have to move the disclosure process forward? Now, if disclosure does go forward, then I imagine Matthew Lowmeyer will probably have some very interesting things to share, because I think if the UFO was monitoring him in the mountains of Tucson, Arizona, he's probably a starseed, galactic envoy, or whatever you want to call people who have these extraterrestrial connections on Earth. He's probably someone that has some kind of soul experience and probably can tell us a lot more about what's really going on. All right, so here is a former CIA contractor who says that the agency had a program and technology expressly purposed for tracking alien DNA in certain familial bloodline groups within the domestic United States. So let me play that for you so you get to hear what he knows about this. And this, I believe, is John Ramirez.
CIA had a program to trace this alien DNA in certain families in the United States, that certain families, and particularly their children, were of interest to CIA. I didn't know what to make of it back then, but you start talking about the GATE program and subsequent studies of children and their capabilities and their abilities to do certain psionic things. That now comes to my mind.
Well, now keep in mind what was just said there about the CIA tracking alien DNA in different family bloodlines, and particularly with children, with what I said earlier about Project Preserve Destiny, that Dan Sherman was working in that project, and he was monitoring, or he was communicating with these grey aliens performing abductions on children. And that that really upset him, and that's why he decided to resign from that program. But that program was briefed to President Trump, according to L'Espresso newspaper. And also we have a ton of reports of abductees that describe how they were abducted as children, not just by grey aliens, but also by the military, covert military in my labs, who were wanting to find out what it was about that particular child that was of interest to the grey aliens. So this I think is corroboration for a lot of witnesses who have come forward over the last few decades talking about genetic programs that are run by grey aliens and that children are very much at the center of those programs. And here you have a CIA contractor saying that the CIA has indeed been tracking alien DNA in children. So I thought that was a very important development. Well, that's it for today for the Week in Review. I will have this next week's Week in Review coming out on time, so I don't think there's any further announcements I need to make. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.